TIAN X Science is where science meets the unknown. And my name's TIAN. I'm from China.
Have you ever considered that the greatest lost civilization in human history might not be located in Egypt or the Maya region, but deep within the Amazon rainforest? What is even more incredible is that it vanished so completely that for over 400 years, almost everyone believed it never existed. It was not until recent decades that a series of archaeological discoveries brought this forgotten history back to the surface. The story begins in 1541, when a Spanish conquistador named Francisco de Orellana stepped into the South American jungle. He was not looking for a lost civilization at the time. He simply wanted to find food. He and his squad had been separated from the main army in the Peruvian highlands. With their food nearly exhausted, everyone was struggling on the brink of starvation. They built a crude wooden boat, pushed it into a tributary, and let the river carry them downstream. They originally only hoped to find supplies, but they never turned back. The turbulent river carried them into an increasingly deep rainforest, entering a world that Europeans had never seen before. Everything Orellana and his crew saw left them in absolute shock. As their wooden boat traveled downstream into the waters later known as the Amazon River, they did not see a desolate primeval forest. Instead, they saw a massive population, a number unimaginably large. The accompanying friar, Gaspar de Carvajal, recorded everything he saw along the way in his journal. The contents of his writings read almost like a hallucination. He wrote that settlements along both banks stretched for kilometers with almost no interruption. He wrote that roads traversed the rainforest connecting towns together. He noted that there were plazas and markets. He described warriors wearing feather headdresses arriving in fleets of canoes, their numbers so great that they nearly blocked the entire river. He also recorded roads, tunnels, and artificial ponds for breeding turtles. He even described that the forest itself had clearly undergone human planning and management. According to his estimates, the population of the entire Amazon basin could have reached tens of millions. However, when Carvajal records reached Spain, they were not accepted. On the contrary, he faced widespread skepticism. Many called him a fantasist, and even believed he was just a boastful man, trying to add glory to a failed expedition. For a long time, the mainstream view was very clear. The Amazon rainforest could not possibly nurture a large-scale civilization. The soil here was too poor, the ecosystem too fragile, and food sources were not stable enough. For centuries, this judgment influenced the academic community. The Amazon was even once called a counterfeit paradise. It looked lush on the surface, but was actually unable to support the development of a massive civilization. Up until the 20th century, the archaeological community still generally believed that the entire Amazon basin was only inhabited by scattered small nomadic tribes. They migrated constantly, had a sparse population, and left almost no ruins behind. Thus, this perspective persisted for over 400 years. Until later, people turned their attention to the soil beneath their feet. Between the 1960s and 1970s, agricultural scientists working in the Brazilian Amazon discovered something strange. Scattered across the vast rainforest were specific areas where the soil was completely different from the surrounding environment. Normal Amazonian soil is typically red, relatively thin, and has very limited nutrients. Ordinary Amazonian soil can barely sustain long-term farming. The frequent rainfall of the tropical rainforest quickly washes away all its nutrients. But the soil in these special zones was entirely different. It was black, dense, and rich in organic matter and charcoal, with extremely deep layers. These are characteristics that ordinary Amazonian soil almost never possesses. Researchers called this soil Terra Preta, or Amazonian dark earth. What truly brought attention to Terra Preta was not just its color, but its composition. Ordinary Amazonian soil loses almost all its fertility after 2 or 3 planting seasons. However, Terra Preta can remain fertile continuously, potentially lasting for hundreds or even thousands of years. Scientists conducted extensive research on this and found that it contained charcoal, animal bone fragments, pottery shards, and compost residues at levels far higher than natural soil. In other words, this soil was not formed naturally, but was artificially created. After testing the oldest layers of Terra Preta, the chronological dating results further shocked researchers. The age of some sites exceeded 8,000 years. This was not a remnant left from the Middle Ages, nor was it the result of several generations of inhabitants living there for a long time. It looked more like a civilization project that lasted for thousands of years. As researchers continued to map the distribution of Amazonian Terra Preta, the scale they uncovered became increasingly impossible to ignore. These dark earths did not appear randomly, nor did they exist in isolation. They were often concentrated on highlands along rivers and in areas showing obvious signs of planning. At one site in the central Amazon, the Terra Preta layer extended continuously for several kilometers. What did this mean? Without a massive, stable, and highly organized population, such a large-scale soil modification project would have been impossible. If only a few nomadic tribes were moving through the forest, they could not have sustained thousands of square kilometers of dark earth for thousands of years. The land itself seemed to have become the most direct evidence, challenging traditional views held for centuries. Perhaps Carvajal had not lied after all. But this was only the beginning. In 2018, an international research team flew an aircraft equipped with light detection and ranging equipment, commonly known as LiDAR, to conduct wide-scale scanning over the Bolivian Amazon region. LiDAR continuously emits laser pulses to the ground and reconstructs the surface topography based on the return time. In the dense rainforest where humans can barely see 10 meters ahead, it can penetrate leaves, branches, and vines, retaining only the true ground structure. What it revealed was the actual landscape hidden beneath the forest canopy. The scenes they witnessed almost completely overturned the understanding formed by generations of academics. There were cities in the truest sense. Not a metaphor, but actual cities. Not scattered settlements of thatched huts, but large-scale settlements featuring circular structures, plazas, sunken roads, and residential zones. Each one covered several square kilometers. The LiDAR survey identified 26 urban centers in total. They were connected by networks of straight roads. Some of these roads extended perfectly straight for over 5 kilometers. In such terrain, building and maintaining such roads over a long period requires an immensely massive amount of engineering effort. More importantly, this was just one region, just one survey, and just a tiny fraction of the area covered by the Amazon rainforest. In fact, earlier discoveries had already pointed in this direction. In the Brazilian state of Acre, researchers began finding a massive number of geometric earthworks in deforested areas starting in the early 21st century. These are gigantic geometric patterns carved into the ground, including circles, squares, and complex geometric structures. Some even reach 300 meters in diameter. These ruins remained hidden under the forest cover for a long time. It was not until the late 20th century, after the forest was cleared for farmland, that they reappeared before human eyes. In Acre state alone, over 450 such geoglyph sites have been discovered so far. They are regular in shape and massive in scale. Some of these sites date back approximately 3,000 years. Some studies also suggest that their layout might correspond to astronomical alignments. This implies that the builders might have had a certain understanding of celestial movements. However, researchers still maintain a cautious attitude toward this. They believe these geoglyphs do not appear to be defensive fortifications, nor do they look like typical residential settlements. They were more likely public spaces for large-scale rituals or gatherings. This also implies that this region at the time probably possessed a social structure capable of organizing a massive population to participate collectively in activities. So exactly how large was this civilization? This is a question profound enough to alter our entire understanding. When you seriously think about it, many things change. Anthropologist Michael Heckenberger lived for a long time in the upper Xingu region of the Brazilian Amazon, living alongside the Guaycurú people and studying the land they have inhabited for generations. In 2008, he published a milestone paper in the journal Science. The paper described a network of ancient settlements that were interconnected and meticulously planned. He even compared it to medieval France. Heckenberger team discovered over 20 large-scale settlements. They were connected by straight roads up to 50 meters wide. Each settlement featured a central plaza, residential zones, defensive trenches, and managed agricultural land. These roads were not trails gradually formed by people walking over time, but actual engineered infrastructure built with purpose. Elevated causeways crossed wetlands, bridges spanned rivers, and the entire landscape was artificially modified to meet the needs of transportation, agriculture, and water management. The largest site among them is referred to by researchers as the Kuhikugu site. It is estimated that during its peak, the population living here was around 2,500 to 5,000 people, and it was merely one node within a network of more than 20 interconnected settlements. If we expand this scale to the entire Amazon basin and combine it with the hundreds of sites continuously discovered by LiDAR, the resulting population estimate becomes absolutely astounding. In the past, the academic community generally believed that before the arrival of Europeans, the population of the entire Amazon basin might have been only around 1 million. Entering the 21st century, this estimate has been constantly revised. Many studies have already raised the number to around 5 million people. Some researchers even propose that the population at the time could have reached 8 million to 10 million people. The population density in some river valleys might even have approached that of Europe before the Industrial Revolution. The total area where complex settlement ruins have been discovered so far is roughly equivalent to the size of France. A civilization the size of France, possessing a population of millions, road networks, agricultural engineering, urban settlements, and large ritual architectures. Yet we only gradually realized its potential existence recently. Or more accurately, we previously refused to believe it existed, because as early as 1542, someone had already recorded all of this, only for later people to label him a liar. Another major reason the Amazon civilization was overlooked for so long is that it has no pyramids, no giant stone temples, and no magnificent ruins commonly seen in Hollywood movies. The Amazon is not a civilization primarily based on stone architecture. It is much more like a civilization built upon the earth. This distinction holds tremendous significance, because Earth cannot be preserved for thousands of years in a tropical rainforest like stone can. The forest will slowly swallow its own history. But this does not mean their engineering techniques were simple. On the contrary, they merely adopted a different approach. In the Llanos de Moxos region of Bolivia, researchers discovered the most complex prehistoric agricultural system in the world. In an area of about 100,000 square kilometers, ancient engineers built farmlands, fish weirs, canals, reservoirs, and elevated causeways to cope with the massive floods that submerged the savanna for months every year. They transformed land that was submerged long-term into an agricultural zone capable of continuously producing food and sustaining a massive population. The raised fields here are not small. Some reach hundreds of meters in length and are precisely elevated to keep crops constantly above the floodwaters. At the same time, channels guided schools of fish into adjacent ponds for concentrated harvesting. These fish weir systems alone demonstrate an incredibly high level of hydraulic engineering capability. These people were not simply adapting to their natural environment, they were actively modifying it. Along the Amazon River and its major tributaries, ancient inhabitants built their settlements on highlands and systematically altered the surrounding topography. Many settlements had defensive trenches built around their perimeters. Some trenches were about 3 meters deep and 10 meters wide, extending for hundreds of meters along the village outskirts. The roads between settlements were also often elevated above the rainforest floor, remaining passable even when the rainy season floods arrived. Besides this, there is pottery. The Amazon region has unearthed a massive amount of incredibly complex and beautifully crafted pottery. The most famous among them is the Mara Shara pottery culture from Marasho Island at the mouth of the Amazon River. Archaeologist Anna Roosevelt conducted years of research there. She discovered that the local civilization persisted on the island for over 1,000 years. They built massive artificial earthen mounds, serving as platforms for residences and rituals, while producing beautifully painted and technologically complex pottery. Its artistic level is fully comparable to other famous pottery traditions in the Americas. Morago Island covers an area of about 40,000 square kilometers. The scale of the artificial mounds on the island is enormous. Some reach 20 meters in height and cover several hectares. Some studies suggest that during its peak, the Maraguara culture might have sustained a population of tens of thousands on this single island. There were no stone buildings and no pyramids, yet it still nurtured a complex social system. So who exactly were the people who witnessed all this? Frankly speaking, our knowledge is actually very limited. The Amazon civilization did not develop a writing system as we understand it today. They left no libraries, carved no texts on monuments, and inscribed no royal genealogies on palace walls. All they left behind was the land, the soil, the pottery, and the memories preserved in the oral traditions of the surviving indigenous people. By combining archaeological discoveries, topographical ruins, and the traditional cultures that still survive in parts of the Amazon today, people are gradually piecing together a possible picture of this civilization. It appears to be a society deeply rooted in the ability to manage the natural environment. The residents of the Upper Xingu region studied by Heckenberger have maintained their settlement layouts for at least over 1,000 years. The villages are all perfectly circular, distributed around a central plaza. The entrance of every village faces east. This circular structure is no accident. It reflects a specific worldview. In their eyes, the world is composed of concentric circles, with the community located at the very center. The roads between villages do not merely serve transportation functions. They equally serve ritual activities. Various religious ceremonies are held along these paths. Trade also flows along these routes. Different settlements maintained contact through complex exchange networks. Feathers, food, specialized skills, and marriage alliances constantly circulated within these networks. This was not a group of isolated villages, but a genuinely functioning civilization network. The spiritual world of ancient Amazonian society was largely built upon the relationship between humans and the forest. Shamans were seen as the mediums connecting the tribe with all of nature. Their understanding of plants reached an astonishingly high level. Indigenous Amazonians mastered the preparation methods of many natural medicines, the most famous of which is ayahuasca. It requires the combination of two different plants and relies on the complex chemical interactions between them to take effect. Even today, researchers are still debating how people originally discovered this specific combination. Their knowledge in agriculture is equally surprising. The creation of Terra Preta required carbonizing organic matter at relatively low temperatures, then mixing it with bone fragments, pottery shards, and compost in specific proportions before finally adding it to the soil. With the correct ratio, the soil becomes increasingly fertile over time and possesses a continuous regenerative capacity. If the method is wrong, this effect will not occur. The understanding of soil properties by those who created this technology seems to have far exceeded what people previously imagined. It was not until the late 20th century that modern science gradually recognized this phenomenon and began attempting replication studies. This was not a primitive civilization struggling to survive in the jungle. Instead, it was more like a civilization that, after thousands of years of exploration, finally learned how to survive and thrive in one of the most complex ecosystems on Earth. In the year 1500, a Portuguese fleet led by Pedro Álvares Cabral arrived on the eastern coast of South America. The news quickly spread across the entire continent through trade networks, even before Europeans truly entered the Amazon interior. But traveling alongside this news was something else unseen: disease. The indigenous people of the Amazon had almost no immunity to European diseases. Smallpox, measles, influenza, and typhus quickly spread. In North America and the Andean regions, European diseases caused massive population deaths even before explorers physically arrived. The Amazon region most likely experienced a similar process. Between 1541 and 1542, an Orellana sailed down the Amazon River. He described a densely populated world. Yet when European expeditions re-entered the same river basin in the late 17th century, what they saw was a starkly different scene. Empty villages, collapsed earthworks, and a forest that was swallowing everything back up. The drastic decline of the Native American population following the arrival of Europeans is considered one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. Specific numbers are still debated, but many studies suggest that in the century following 1492, the Native American population might have dropped by more than 90%. The Amazon region was densely populated with well-developed trade networks, meaning diseases likely spread rapidly along these routes. The entire civilization did not vanish in a single day, but gradually collapsed over a century of continuous disasters. Cities slowly emptied out. There were no longer enough people to maintain the trenches and roads. Once the raised farmlands and fish weir systems lost their maintenance, these earthworks were flooded, covered in sediment, and ultimately collapsed. The Terra Preta farmlands, devoid of human management, were reclaimed by the forest. Tree roots pierced through the plazas, and canopies covered the roads. In just 100 years, one of the largest civilizations in the Western Hemisphere gradually faded from human sight. For the next 400 years, whenever someone proposed the possibility that a massive civilization once existed in the Amazon, the response was almost always the same. The rainforest could not support such a civilization. You are just overusing your imagination. You were fooled. The most lamentable part is that precisely because this collapse was so total, it made it much easier for later generations to deny it ever existed. A civilization capable of shocking the world might become unbelievable simply because its disappearance was too thorough. Today, the real question troubling people is no longer whether the Amazon civilization existed. At least judging from LiDAR surveys, Terra Preta research, and the archaeological achievements of Heckenberger and others, this question is supported by an ever-growing body of evidence. The real question is how we should view these discoveries when facing them. Entering the 2020s, the Amazon forest is still vanishing at a rate of thousands of square kilometers every year. Those geoglyph sites accidentally discovered due to agricultural clearing are also being continuously destroyed by new development. Countless unrecorded archaeological sites are fading away. An entire chapter of human history might be completely erased before we even have the time to read it. Even the Amazonian Terra Preta itself is now being mined and sold as gardening soil in Brazilian markets. The vital information recorded in the sites where that soil originated, detailing how this civilization endured for millennia, will be permanently unrecoverable once lost. But the significance of the Amazon story goes far beyond the archaeological discoveries themselves. It is more about challenging a long-held, ingrained perception, challenging our assumptions about what is truly possible. Some studies suggest that the Amazon civilization once sustained millions of people in one of the most complex ecological environments on Earth. And they achieved this not by clear-cutting the forest. Quite the opposite. They chose to coexist with it. The Amazonian Terra Preta they created is now being studied by soil scientists who hope to apply it to sustainable tropical agriculture. The raised field systems in the Moxos region are also being viewed by researchers as vital references for agricultural models adapted to flood environments, especially today, as global climate change continuously alters rainfall patterns in tropical regions. These ancient technologies are garnering renewed attention. A civilization once thought to be completely non-existent might just provide new inspiration for the unresolved problems of modern society. And what is truly worth pondering is another deeper question. If such a massive civilization could vanish so completely that for 400 years countless people denied its existence, then how much more history have we overlooked? How many stories once dismissed as myths, fantasies, or even crazy ideas remain undiscovered simply because the evidence lies buried beneath forests, oceans, or the passage of time? In 1542, Carvajal wrote about seeing an Amazon filled with cities. For 400 years, people treated him as a liar. It was not until the emergence of LiDAR that people gradually realized his records might not have been baseless after all. So the next time you hear a story that seems too massive, too bizarre, or even inconsistent with the textbooks, maybe you can think of the Amazon first. Think of that friar standing on the boat. He desperately recorded everything before his eyes, watching city after city glide past along the riverbanks, yet no one was willing to believe he had actually seen it all. So, what do you think of these discoveries? Do you believe there are other lost civilizations still hidden beneath our ingrained perceptions, waiting to be rediscovered in the future? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section. If you enjoy content about ancient civilizations and historical mysteries, do not forget to like and subscribe. The story of the lost Amazon civilization is not just a forgotten chapter of history. It is a giant mirror reflecting our own era. The greatest lesson we learn here is not about archaeology, but about human humility in the face of knowledge. For 400 years, we blinded ourselves with a deeply ingrained prejudice that a glorious civilization must be built of stone, concrete, and the conquest of nature. We forgot that the greatest wisdom sometimes lies in harmony. Those ancient people taught us an invaluable lesson about survival. At a time when our modern world is struggling with climate change, their fertile Terra Preta is proof that sustainable development is not about destroying nature but living in rhythm with it. But of course, history is always a puzzle with countless missing pieces. Everything I have shared today, here on TIAN Science, represents my personal perspectives and opinions, independently researched, synthesized, and analyzed from various sources. Therefore, these conclusions could be absolutely right, and they could also be entirely wrong. Is this grand Amazonian empire a historical truth, or just an exaggerated myth spun by later generations? Are we truly standing on the threshold of rewriting human history, or are we just hastily jumping to conclusions based on a few underground ruins? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. Let us turn the comment section below into a vibrant scientific discussion roundtable. What do you think about all this? Is it real or fake? Right or wrong? And by the way, from which country or city in the world are you watching this video right now? It always makes me incredibly emotional and proud to see how far our TIAN science community stretches across the globe. I cannot wait to meet all of you down in the comments. Always keep an open mind, never stop asking questions, and keep exploring. Goodbye, and see you next time.